MrBeast had done just about everything a YouTuber could dream of. He'd given away cars, islands, private jets, even stacks of cash that barely fit inside a truck. Every video was bigger than the last, louder than the one before. But lately, something felt different. He sat in the passenger seat of the van, scrolling through his phone as the team prepped for the next shoot. We bought random people homes. It was supposed to be heartwarming, emotional, the kind of video that made headlines and broke records. Yet Jimmy stared at the title and felt nothing. "All right, last one for the day," his director said, looking over a clipboard. "It's an old house on the east side. We'll get the reveal, do the handover, and we're wrapped." The van pulled into a narrow street lined with tall trees. Most houses looked new, freshly painted, except one. A small white home stood at the very end of the road. Its wooden fence leaned sideways, paint peeling off, a porch swing creaking slowly in the breeze. The afternoon sun hit the front windows just right, making them glow golden. Jimmy leaned forward. "That the one?" "Yeah," the cameraman replied. "Perfect contrast. Old house, emotional story. It'll look great on camera." But the moment Jimmy stepped out of the van, the mood shifted. The air smelled like baked pie and garden soil, not the kind of place you just show up with a camera crew. And sitting on the porch, in a faded blue sweater, was an elderly woman with soft gray hair, holding a cup of tea in both hands. She didn't look surprised to see a van full of strangers pull up. She just smiled politely, like she'd been expecting company. "Hi there," Jimmy said, walking closer, the crunch of gravel under his shoes. "We're filming a video today, kind of a special one." The woman tilted her head. "Oh, and what kind of video is that?" Jimmy smiled, out of habit more than anything. "We're buying houses for random people. Changing lives, you know?" Her eyes twinkled. She took a slow sip of her tea. "Well, that sounds lovely," she said gently. "But this house isn't for sale." Jimmy blinked, caught off guard. "Oh, that's okay. We're not really buying it. We just—" She interrupted with a soft chuckle. "I mean, dear, it's not for sale because I couldn't sell it even if I wanted to." She looked out toward the yard, the old oak tree, the cracked walkway, the wind chime barely moving. "I've lived here for 50 years. My husband built this porch. Every creak in it has a story." The crew stood awkwardly near the van, cameras half raised, unsure if they should keep filming. Jimmy glanced at them and shook his head slightly. "Not yet." He looked back at her. "Mind if I sit for a second?" She smiled again, motioning to the empty chair beside her. "Of course, dear. But only if you like pie. I just took one out of the oven." For a moment, the cameras didn't matter. The plan didn't matter. And as Jimmy sat down beside her, the world that usually ran at 1,000,000 miles an hour suddenly felt still. Something told him this wouldn't be just another video. This was going to be a story he wouldn't post. The smell of warm apple pie filled the porch. Jimmy sat beside the woman, unsure whether to speak or just listen to the sounds of the neighborhood, the soft wind, a distant barking dog, the slow creak of the swing. He wasn't used to silence. His world was always filled with motion, countdowns, music cues, camera shutters. But this felt different. The woman glanced at him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "You look nervous, dear. You're not used to slowing down, are you?" Jimmy laughed softly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Not really. My job kind of depends on everything being fast. Big ideas, quick edits, big reactions." She nodded knowingly. The world loves noise. But peace is harder to find. He looked around the porch, the chipped paint, the handmade birdhouse, the faded doormat that read "Welcome Home." "You've lived here long?" 52 years this spring," she said proudly. "My husband built the fence, the stairs, even that silly mailbox. Every part of this place has his touch. After he passed, I thought about selling, but it didn't feel right. It's like he's still here, in the walls somehow." Jimmy stayed quiet. He could feel something in her tone, the kind of love that doesn't need to be explained. "You must miss him," he said softly. "I do," she replied, her voice warm but steady. "But I've learned to talk to him through the things he left behind. When I bake, when I water the garden, when the wind hits the chimes, that's him saying hello." For a long moment, neither of them said a word. The sun slipped lower, painting the house in orange and gold. Finally, Jimmy broke the silence. "You know, I was supposed to surprise you today. Buy this house, film it, post it online. Make people cry. In a good way, I guess." The woman chuckled, shaking her head. You don't need to buy a house to make people feel something. Just being kind does the job. Jimmy smiled, but it was a quiet smile, the kind that hides a realization. He looked at the camera crew waiting by the van. They were ready to start filming, waiting for his cue. But suddenly, for the first time in years, he didn't want the cameras. He turned back to her. Would you mind if we didn't film this part? Her eyes softened. Of course not, dear. Some stories are better lived than recorded. And as the evening light settled over the porch, Jimmy realized she was right. This wasn't content. This was connection. Jimmy followed her inside, leaving the cameras and crew outside by the van. The moment he stepped through the door, it felt like time had slowed down. The air smelled of cinnamon, old books, and a lifetime of quiet days. Every shelf held a memory, framed photos, faded postcards, tiny trinkets that didn't look expensive but radiated meaning. This place, he murmured, looking around. It feels alive. The woman smiled softly. That's because it is. Every creak in the floorboard, every scratch on the door, it all tells a story. She pointed to a photo above the fireplace. A man in an army uniform, holding a younger version of her close, both smiling at something off camera. My husband, Walter, she said. He built this house with his own hands after he came back from the war. We didn't have much, but we had each other. That was enough. Jimmy stepped closer to the photo. The smile on the man's face, the way her hand rested on his chest, it was pure love frozen in time. You two look happy, he said quietly. We were, she replied. He used to say, we can't take the house with us, but we can leave love in the walls. And I think he did. Jimmy chuckled lightly, but his voice carried a tinge of sadness. You know, I spend millions trying to make people happy for 10 minutes. And somehow this house, this one old house does it without even trying. She smiled, her eyes glistening. Happiness isn't about what you give, dear. It's about how much of yourself you put into it. He glanced at his phone, dozens of messages lighting up the screen. Where are you? We're losing light. You ready to film? But for once, he didn't care. The video could wait. The world could wait. This wasn't another viral moment. It was something real. Would you like some tea? She asked gently. Jimmy nodded. Only if it's your recipe. As she moved toward the kitchen, humming softly, he sat down in the old armchair by the window. The wood creaked beneath him. He noticed an old quilt on the couch, frayed, colorful, patched with care. Every square was different, like tiny moments stitched together to make something whole. He thought about his life, the noise, the endless pressure to outdo himself, the millions watching. And for the first time in years, he wondered what it would be like to just stop filming. When she returned with 2 steaming mugs, she said something that stayed with him long after that day. You don't need to build bigger things to make a difference, Jimmy. Sometimes, it's enough just to sit with someone and listen. And that's exactly what he did. No script, no cameras, just presence. After nearly an hour inside, Jimmy stepped back out onto the porch with her. The crew was still waiting, standing awkwardly near the van, cameras hanging at their sides. The light was fading, that perfect golden hour they always tried to capture, but he didn't even notice. The woman followed him out, holding the door open. You have a busy evening ahead, I suppose? Jimmy smiled faintly. I guess I do. But right now, it doesn't feel that important. The director jogged over, whispering, Jimmy, we're running out of time. If we don't film now, we'll lose the shot. We can reschedule the rest later, but this one. Jimmy nodded absently, still looking at the porch swing. I'll handle it. Then he turned to the woman. Ma'am, we came here today to buy houses for people who needed help, to give something that might change their lives. So, if you'll let me, I'd like to buy this one from you. Fix it, renovate it, whatever you need. You'd never have to worry about a thing again. She looked at him for a long time, her hands wrapped around her teacup. That's very kind of you, dear. Truly. But I don't want to sell. He blinked, confused. You don't. She shook her head, smiling softly. This isn't just a house. It's my husband's laugh echoing down the hallway. It's our Sunday dinners, our fights, our peace. If you took that away, even to make it prettier, it wouldn't be home anymore. Jimmy fell silent. The crew behind him exchanged glances. They weren't sure what to film, or if they even should. The woman stepped closer, her voice gentle but firm. You know, I don't need a new house. I just need someone to stop by once in a while. Maybe share some tea. Maybe talk about their day. He nodded slowly. the words landing heavier than he expected. That's all you want. That's all I've ever wanted, she said, smiling. Someone to remember that I'm still here. Jimmy looked back at his team. They were ready, cameras in hand, waiting for his cue to create another viral, life-changing video. But he couldn't do it. Not this time. He raised a hand and said quietly, "Turn the cameras off." The director froze. "Wait, what? Jimmy, are you sure?" "Yeah," he said, his voice steady. "We're not filming this one." The crew hesitated, but he didn't repeat himself. He just sat back down on the porch steps beside her. The woman smiled knowingly, as if she'd seen something in him that he hadn't yet. "You don't always need the world to watch, dear," she said softly. "Sometimes one person is enough." And as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, painting the yard in orange and gold, MrBeast, the man known for doing everything on camera, chose, for the first time, to leave the story off-screen. The crew began packing up in silence. They were used to noise, laughter, music, countdowns, the rush of 3, 2, 1, go. But this time there was none of that. Only the sound of cicadas in the distance and the slow creak of the porch swing. Jimmy stayed sitting beside the old woman. She looked peaceful, her teacup resting on her lap, her gaze lost somewhere beyond the garden. He took a deep breath. "You know, I don't really remember the last time I sat down without thinking about filming it." She chuckled softly. "Maybe that's why you don't feel at home anywhere, dear. You're always trying to live for the lens, not for yourself." Her words hit him harder than she could have known. For years, he'd been running, from one challenge to another, one project after the next. Every time he reached a new goal, another appeared. Bigger, louder, faster. But none of them ever made him feel like this. "Do you ever get lonely here?" he asked after a while. "Oh, I do," she said with a nod. "But I've learned something over time. Loneliness isn't always about being alone. Sometimes it's just not having someone who listens. That's rarer than people think." Jimmy stared at the porch railing, chipped and faded from years of rain and sun. "You're right," he said quietly. "I have millions of people watching me, but sometimes it feels like no one's really there." She turned to him, her eyes soft and kind. "Then maybe you needed to come here tonight. Not to give me a house, but to remember your own." He smiled faintly. "Maybe so." The sound of the van doors closing echoed down the street. The team was ready to leave. The director called out, hesitant, "We'll see you back at the hotel?" Jimmy waved a hand without turning around. "Yeah, go ahead." The van's engine faded into the distance, leaving him alone with her under the dim glow of the porch light. "Would you like another slice of pie?" she asked. He grinned. "Only if you promise not to tell anyone I said yes." She laughed, and for a moment, it felt like home, a quiet, ordinary moment no one would ever see on YouTube. When he finally stood to leave, she said softly, "You can come back anytime, you know." He nodded. "I think I will." And as he walked down the small path toward his car, the wind brushed past the trees, carrying the faint sound of a wind chime. It was the kind of sound you'd never notice unless you stopped to listen. And tonight, for the first time in years, Jimmy did. The following morning, Jimmy sat in his hotel room, staring blankly at his laptop screen. The folder titled, "We Bought Random People Homes," blinked at him. Hours of footage waiting to be edited, thousands of comments that would soon flood in. Normally, that site would fill him with excitement. But now, it just felt empty. He scrolled through the clips from the previous day, families crying, keys handed over, laughter and hugs. They were all beautiful moments, but somehow, his mind kept returning to that quiet porch, the smell of apple pie, and the old woman's voice saying, "Just stop by once in a while." He closed the laptop. "Hey, you good?" his producer asked, leaning against the doorway with a coffee in hand. "We got solid footage yesterday. The internet's gonna love it." Jimmy nodded absently. "Yeah, it's good stuff." But his voice didn't sound convinced. The producer frowned. "What's up? You didn't like how the last house turned out?" Jimmy looked out the hotel window. "No, I liked it. Too much, maybe." "What do you mean?" He hesitated before speaking. "She didn't want a house. Or money. Just company. That's all. And I told her I'd visit again." The producer smirked. "You? Visiting random people off camera? That's new." Jimmy gave a small smile. "Yeah, maybe that's the point." Later that afternoon, while the rest of the team reviewed footage, Jimmy slipped out quietly. No cameras. No plan. Just a paper bag with a warm pie he'd picked up from a local bakery and a small note folded in his pocket. The drive back to her neighborhood felt longer this time. Slower. He turned off the radio and let the silence sit beside him. When he finally pulled up, the old white house was just as he remembered, sunlight spilling across the porch, a cat sleeping near the steps, the wind chime whispering softly. She was there, of course, sitting in the same chair, as if time had paused. "Back so soon?" she asked, smiling when she saw him. "I brought dessert," he said, lifting the bag sheepishly. "But don't worry, I didn't bake it myself." She laughed. "Then we're both safe." As they sat together again, talking about nothing and everything, Jimmy realized something he hadn't felt in years: peace. No cameras, no noise, no expectations, just two people and a quiet porch. And when he left that evening, he tucked the note under her teacup. "Thank you for reminding me what giving really means. I'll see you again soon." He didn't take a photo. He didn't post about it. But for once, that didn't matter at all. Weeks passed. The "We Bought Random People Homes" video was released, and, as expected, it exploded online. Millions of views in hours, reaction videos, trending hashtags, sponsorship offers flooding in. Everyone on the team was buzzing. Everyone except Jimmy. He sat in his office surrounded by screens, each playing clips of his smiling face. The comments were pouring in. "You're a legend, MrBeast. This man deserves a Nobel Prize. Nobody gives like Jimmy does." He should have felt proud. But instead, he felt something strange, a hollow echo under all that noise. He shut the monitor off. The room fell silent. His phone buzzed with a message from his producer. "We've got brand deals waiting. You ready for the next challenge?" Jimmy didn't reply. He just looked at the wall where a photo of the team hung, smiling in front of a mansion giveaway. But his mind wasn't there. It was back on that porch, under the soft porch light, with the sound of wind chimes. Without thinking twice, he grabbed his keys. The drive was long, quiet, and strangely calm. By the time he reached the familiar neighborhood, the sun was low in the sky again, the same warm, golden light as that first day. Her garden looked a little neater now. The fence had been repaired, and a small flower bed bloomed near the mailbox. Someone had clearly been helping her. Jimmy smiled. The team must have kept visiting, just like he'd asked. He parked the car, stepped out, and walked up the old path. The boards of the porch creaked beneath his shoes, exactly the same way as before. She opened the door even before he could knock. "I had a feeling you'd come back," she said with a grin. "You did?" "Of course," she replied. "You left without finishing your tea last time." He laughed, stepping inside. "Guess I had to fix that." This time, she didn't ask why he was there. She just set out 2 mugs and a pie, homemade this time. They sat together again, talking about everything but work. She told stories about her husband's silly jokes, the neighbor's loud dog, her favorite movie she watched every Sunday. And for once, Jimmy didn't feel like he was missing out on anything happening online. As he was leaving that evening, she said, "You know, dear, everyone out there probably thinks your biggest gift is giving things away. But that's not it." He raised an eyebrow. "No." She shook her head. "Your biggest gift is showing up, really showing up. That's rarer than money." He stood there quietly, the words sinking deep. Then he smiled. That same small, real smile he only ever had on that porch. "I'll be back again," he said. "I know," she replied. "I've already set out 2 cups." And for the first time in a long time, MrBeast didn't feel like a creator chasing numbers. He felt like a person being exactly where he needed to be. A few days later, Jimmy gathered his small team. Not the production crew, not the editors or brand partners, just the people he trusted most. They met in his quiet office late at night, long after the rest of the studio had gone home. "I want to do something," he said, leaning forward over the table. "But not for a video. Not for clicks. For her." His manager blinked. "You mean the woman from that old house?" Jimmy nodded. "Yeah, I can't stop thinking about her. She lives alone. Her husband built that house 50 years ago, and she's been taking care of it ever since. I want to make sure she never has to worry about anything again. Bills, repairs, food, anything." One of his friends frowned. "So, like a secret charity?" Jimmy smiled. "No, like a promise." They spent the next week quietly organizing it. No sponsors, no giveaways, no cameras. Jimmy personally covered every cost. The team found local volunteers to help fix her roof, repaint the porch, plant flowers in the garden. Every improvement was done carefully, making sure the house looked exactly the same, just stronger, safer, loved. He even arranged for a local bakery to deliver a small pie every Friday, the same kind she always made. When the work was done, Jimmy drove out there alone. The air was crisp, and the scent of fresh paint still lingered faintly. She was sitting in her usual spot, knitting something colorful. "Looks like someone's been busy," she said, eyeing the new fence. Jimmy smirked. "Yeah, I heard the neighborhood's got some good-hearted troublemakers." She chuckled. "Troublemakers who bake pies and fix leaks, huh?" "Something like that." He sat down beside her, watching the sun dip behind the trees. "You didn't have to do all this," she said quietly. "I know," he replied, "but I wanted to. You're a good boy, Jimmy." He smiled softly. "You know, I don't think anyone's called me that since I was a kid." "Well," she said, tapping his hand gently, "maybe someone needed to remind you that you still are one." They sat there in comfortable silence. No words, no noise, no audience. Just two people, a sunset, and the hum of the world around them. And for once, MrBeast, the man who built his empire on being seen, found peace in being invisible. Months passed. MrBeast kept uploading, one massive project after another. He planted trees, built wells, gave away cars, paid for surgeries. His name was everywhere again. Headlines, billboards, YouTube homepages. People called him the man who never stops giving. But there was one story that never made it into any video, one that no one outside his circle even knew existed. Every few weeks, between flights and shoots, Jimmy would take a quiet detour to that small neighborhood on the edge of town. No cameras, no team, just him, his hoodie pulled up, holding a paper bag with something simple, groceries, books, flowers, sometimes just another pie. Each time, the same scene repeated, the old porch light, the smell of tea, and her warm smile waiting by the door. "You again," she'd say with a grin. "Couldn't stay away," he'd reply. She'd pour tea. He'd tell her stories, not the viral kind, but the real ones. About how sometimes the internet felt like an endless noise, how giving had started to feel like a performance, and how sitting here reminded him what it used to mean. She listened the way few people ever did, quietly, patiently, without judgment. And when he finished, she'd always say the same thing. "You're still doing good, dear. Just don't forget who it's for." One evening, she told him something he never forgot. "When my husband was alive, he used to say, 'The world doesn't need you to do everything. It just needs you to do something, with love.' That's enough, you know." Jimmy sat back, letting her words settle like dust in the sunlight. For all the millions of people he'd reached, for all the content he'd created, it was that one quiet voice on a porch that truly stayed with him. He never filmed those visits, never mentioned her in interviews, never posted a thing. But sometimes, when fans asked him, "What's the one video you're most proud of?" he'd pause, smile faintly, and say, "The one no one ever saw." And though the world would never know what he meant, she would. Because every time he knocked on that creaky porch door, she'd already have 2 cups waiting. It was a gray morning in Greenville when Jimmy's phone buzzed with a message from one of his assistants, short, hesitant, and unusually serious. "It's about her, the lady from the house. She's not feeling well. Her neighbor called." Jimmy froze mid-step. The day was supposed to be packed, a sponsorship meeting, a call with YouTube, 2 shoots scheduled back-to-back. But the second he read that message, everything else blurred into background noise. He didn't even reply. He just grabbed his keys and left. The drive felt longer than usual. Every red light, every slow turn made his pulse quicken. When he finally turned into her street, the familiar side of the White House hit differently this time. The curtains were drawn. The porch swing was still. He parked, got out, and jogged to the front door. The neighbor, a kind woman he'd met once before, opened it. "She's resting," she said softly. "She had a bad fall. Doctor said she needs rest and company more than anything." Jimmy nodded, his throat tight. "Can I see her?" "Of course," the neighbor said with a faint smile. "She'll be happy to." He stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of lavender and lemon tea. The room was dim but peaceful. She lay on the couch, a light blanket pulled up, eyes closed. For a moment, he just stood there, unsure what to say. Then her voice broke the silence. "You walk too loud, dear. I knew it was you." He laughed quietly and sat beside her. "Guess I'm not great at sneaking in." She smiled weakly, her voice soft. I didn't expect you today. I could not come, he said. You scared me. Oh, nonsense, she whispered. Just a little tumble. My old bones are catching up to me. He shook his head. You should have called me. She gave him a knowing look. You're busy saving the world, Jimmy. I wasn't about to pull you away from that. He smiled sadly. Maybe the world can wait once in a while. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and patted his. You remind me of Walter sometimes, she said softly. Always thinking the world might fall apart if he stopped moving. But it never did. Jimmy swallowed the lump in his throat. You sound like him too. Always right. She chuckled weakly. That's how marriage works. One person learns to always be right, and the other learns to agree. He sat there for hours, making her laugh, reading her old letters aloud, talking about everything and nothing. By evening, her color had returned, and she was smiling again. When he stood to leave, she gripped his hand gently. You've already given me more than you know, dear. Don't let this world make you forget how to be human. He nodded, holding her hand for a moment longer. I won't. As he stepped back outside, the porch light flickered on, the same soft glow as always, and the wind chime whispered faintly in the distance. That night, he didn't post a single thing. He just sat in his car, staring at the quiet house, grateful that she was still there, and realizing that maybe this was what real giving looked like. A few weeks later, Jimmy stopped by again, this time with flowers instead of pie. She looked stronger, smiling when she saw him at the door. You keep coming back, she said softly. Someone has to check on you, he replied, handing her the flowers. And I'm pretty sure your porch misses me. They sat for a while, talking about little things, the neighbor's new cat, the weather, her favorite book. But when he stood to leave, she looked at him with a kind of warmth that felt final. Promise me something, she said. Don't lose this part of you when the lights turn back on. He nodded, trying not to show how much those words hit him. I won't. She smiled. Good. Then I can rest easy. He hugged her gently, careful, quiet, grateful. And as he walked down the steps, he didn't look back. He didn't need to. He already knew she was smiling. Months later, Jimmy returned again. Same quiet street, same creaky porch. But this time, the house looked a little different. The flowers were blooming, the paint was fresh, and a small plaque by the door read, "Built with love, and kept that way." The neighbor stepped out and smiled. She talked about you a lot, she said softly. Said you reminded her that people still care. Jimmy nodded, the words catching in his throat. He sat on the porch for a while, letting the wind chime play its gentle tune. The seat beside him was empty, but it didn't feel lonely. It felt full. He left a single pie on the table, with a small note tucked beneath it. Thank you for showing me what giving really means. Then he stood, took one last look at the house, and smiled. Because even now, he knew, he'd still come back sometimes. Not for a video, not for the world, just to visit a friend.